You're listening to America Unfiltered, where history, culture, and travel come together. I'm your host, Karin Aaron, and join me as we go beyond the surface to explore America through the people, places, and communities shaping it today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of the America's 250 Plus podcast. This series invites us to learn something new about people and communities that are too often left out of the American story. Our goal is simple: to uncover stories about people and communities that are often missing from the traditional American narratives. Each episode opens with an On This Day in America 250 years ago moment, using history as our starting point to explore the voices and the experiences that shape our country today. So to kick this off, on this day in America 250 years ago, the British would hire 12,000 German mercenaries known as Hessians to fight the colonies. And this move escalated the Revolutionary War that brought about the fight for independence on the global stage. So basically, it was this day 250 years ago that the heat started getting hot, and it was on its way to July 4th, 1776. So that is your history moment. Just want to get and share that with our audience so you know where we're starting from and where we were and where we're going. So for today's episode, we are diving into one of my favorite topics. This titled Before 1776, Whose America Are We Still Telling? And as America approaches the 250th anniversary, we're being asked to reflect on who we are as a nation, but what if the bigger question is, whose America have we been telling all along? So today's conversation asks us to look at a deeper perspective and power and inclusion. And today joining me is one of my favorite people, Greg DeShields. Greg is a nationally respected DEI leader in tourism and cultural storytelling. And he is the current host of the Something to Say podcast to share his perspective on this topic. But before we get started, I have to share a little information about my friend Greg, because he is definitely more than just a leader and a visionary. He is considered as an expert. So just a little bit about him. Greg has spent over 20 years driving national impact through inclusive workforce and diversity-centered strategic partnership. Greg earned his AS in hospitality and restaurant management, a BS in hospitality management from Johnson & Wales University. He's also a graduate of several leadership programs, including the Urban League of Philadelphia, Leadership Forum Philadelphia, and the Greater Philadelphia Leadership Exchange. But there is more. Greg holds multiple certifications. He is certified diversity executive from the Society of Diversity. He is certified hospitality educator from the American Hotel and Lodging Association. He's a licensed Diamond Exclusiveness assessment provider from Culture Brokers. So at the end of the day, Greg is the right person to be having this conversation with. I'm so proud of the work that he's doing. He is definitely serving on multiple boards. He is now the new president of the SCAL Philadelphia chapter, leading the international messaging on travel and tourism. So I want to make sure that we spend enough time talking about Greg and following his extraordinary work in this area. So Greg, thank you so much for joining our first episode of this podcast.
Well, Karin, thank you so much. And, you've used the word visionary and leader with me, but I have to point out that you are, without any doubt, a visionary leader. This conversation about creating a podcast called America 250 Plus was this idea that was birthed over a year ago. And here you are now launching your first episode. And I just want to congratulate you. Podcasting is not easy, and you and I have had enough conversations about that to know that's
Yes,
true.
we have. Yes, we have.
But
Yes.
I do really congratulate you, and I'm so thrilled that we were able to partner and do a spinoff through Something to Say as we move into what will be season 3 in March of Something to
Exactly.
Say podcast. What better way to celebrate than to open the door for the creation of a new podcast? And we're thrilled to join you. And I think you
Love it,
are.
love it, love it, and congrats to you. So let's get into it
All right.
because I'm so excited to feature you and hear your feedback. So I'm going to start with just kind of jumping right in. Your career, right? Your career has centered on equity and access and representation in the hospitality and tourism industry. So when you hear before America, how does that align with the work that you've spent years advancing?
Well, I think the concept of equity, inclusion, diversity, or however you want to perceive it as it relates to our country, it is a contributing component to the American experiment. This concept around democracy and the ability for all men to be free and equal. I mean, the founding fathers had some very creative ideas, but it was something that was going to have to evolve throughout the decades and throughout the years. And even today, we see that there is a continued evolution of it. Throughout the last 50 or 60 years, the emphasis around how we as a country embrace the idea of inclusion and diversity has had various interpretations. And even the space that we're living in today is somewhat, I guess, reimagining what it is. But I would say that the experience that I've had in my career, and as I look at it from a parallel to our country, it is an experiment and it one that needs to have time to evolve and get better. And I feel very optimistic that as
Mm.
our country continues to grow and our efforts around being a more diverse and a more inclusive country, that we'll see that that plays out for our citizens.
Yes, yes, yes. Love this. Absolutely. So, kind of following that in your work as a certified diversity executive, what biases have you seen persist in how American history is taught or marketed, especially in cultural tourism? So, how do you see that as someone who is an expert in this field and what that looks like now?
Well, we had a rather, intensive period through, let's say, 2020 through 2024 where we were able to really evolve the sense of how stories are told and how the ways of interpreting the American story, not necessarily the Black story, but the American story. Whoever comes to this country, they all have a particular story. And there was a lot of voice that was given to people who wanted to tell those stories, whether you were Native American, whether you were Asian, whether you were from the Caribbean islands. There's a number of ways that people had their experience and were telling what it means for them to be an American in the United States. And those voices were elevated. And we were fortunate to hear those stories. And I think people walked away with a great deal of value. We do live in a time now where those opportunities are not as accommodated as they may have been in the past. And it's difficult to think that these stories may be suppressed or in some places completely muted or just incredibly eliminated. I have to do a shout out to the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals. Jason Dunn, who's the president and CEO, I've been collaborating with him on their George Turner Scholars program to build an academic curriculum that tells the students who are participating the business fundamentals to be an excellent meeting professional, but also woven in that curriculum that we
Mhm.
developed is the Black history in hospitality
Love
and
it.
telling the stories of individuals who were Black and what they did to make a difference. And honestly, one of the stories that just continues to leave me speechless is Josephine Baker, because I always think of her as somebody who left the United States in order to make a statement. But she was performing in Las Vegas. And at that time, Blacks could not perform and stay in the casinos that they were performing. And she had
Wow.
friends who came and they were escorted out of the nightclub. She was so angry that she left the stage, sat in their vacant seats, and would not perform until they were able to come back. Now they did, and ultimately she became a trailblazer in creating more equity and engagement opportunities for Black performers in Las Vegas. I know that there's a story that you also hear about her that she took a dive in one of the swimming pools and they actually drained the swimming pool because there was a Black woman who swam in it. But there's so many incredible stories of individuals who were pioneers, who fought the good fight and continue to do that. And I think that's where the idea of storytelling has to continue because there are a young generation who would lose that story, lose that insight, and the ability to build it in a curriculum that will allow them to maintain their professional knowledge, but also have their cultural knowledge is, I think, a priceless experience.
Yeah, and just kind of expanding on that, I think that you're absolutely right because today's generation, particularly young people, they are not familiar with the story of they may not even are not even aware of who Josephine Baker is, yet alone understand the not just the struggles that she went through, but the footprint that she laid today.
Mhm.
So I think you're right. I think it's very important that these stories still continue to live on and that we still can kind of memorialize that, everything where we are today started from somewhere else or someone else. But you're absolutely right. I think that this is very, very important. So it's just amazing. So let me ask, just kind of us going off script a little bit. So as the anniversary is coming towards us, many organizations want to add inclusive programs, right? So, they want to go ahead and just try to kind of fill their coffers with, trying to show and look and feel that they're very inclusive. But from your experience, how do we distinguish meaningful inclusion from just symbolic gestures just to check the box because the anniversary is on its way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important for anyone who is in a position to
Hmm.
speak about inclusion today to ensure that it does include everyone. And I think that at times there is an overemphasis on being more specific about, telling this story and telling that story. When
Right.
it's everyone's story, we're all Americans, right? So I
Yeah.
think as we celebrate that 250th anniversary, that we have to be very creative and be very honest to connect the stories even if we are going to do a very specific story, how does that build into the tapestry of what it means to be an American? And I think we have to be mindful that in the space that we live in today, it is about more of how everyone is included, not just some people, but everyone. And we have to be the talented experts in our field of tourism and hospitality and storytelling to be able to tell a very enhanced story. And let's
Mhm.
let's let's face it, we all have very unique families. There are families who have, descendants who are from the Caribbean islands, and there are families who have members who are from Asia. And how do they come together and tell that story as one family? And that's what I'm getting at. I think we just have to be able to tell stories in a more inclusive way that does not leave anyone out and allows for everyone's story to be a part of it.
Well, and I'll just go ahead and just add this to our listening audience that one thing that makes, I'm patting you on your back, but one thing that makes you more remarkable because you do sit and serve in a consultancy space. So if there's a destination or a city that's struggling with the history of their town, or they want to go ahead and show to their visitors a more inclusive environment, it's great to have people like you that they can call on and say, help me keep the history and the narrative authentic, but also be welcome and engaging for visitors to come in and experience this. Because that's what I find that people who truly want to explore and learn it, get educated on where they are and what they're eating, they want the real story. But
Mhm.
sometimes we get a little embarrassed about what happened 250 years ago and we don't know how to share it. So kudos to people like you and in your industry that can get and walk a city or a destination through that to
Mhm.
help them go ahead and get to the real true story of America. So yeah. So let's talk about education
Sure.
because I did talk in your bio about how you worked with several educational institutions. So part of your career in education has been about teaching and training and developing curriculum. How should educational institutions approach A250 with bias and awareness and also inclusivity at the core? So, because they are the heartbeat, students and what the next, the past, the present, and the future. So, what's your position on how educational institutions should approach this anniversary?
Well, I think academic institutions all have to follow the protocol and the guidelines that are issued to all faculty, staff, and administration. And
Mhm.
that may be significantly different than where we were years ago with the latitude that we may have had. I do think, though, as educators, as you develop curriculum, that you are perhaps being much more creative in terms of how you develop the content and how you tell the stories, and not necessarily allow for it or to look at it from the perspective that one size fits all, because it doesn't, especially
Right.
with a younger generation today. Even if we took out some of the challenges we have today, I think there's just a whole different perspective
Mhm.
around being educated by today's young student. So you are, as a professor or teacher or an instructor, tasked with being
Yeah.
as creative as you possibly can to provide whatever avenue, whatever vehicle is there in order for students to be able to get a full comprehension of whatever the history is. Now, some of that is based on some of the individual work that you give to students. It may be how you establish this format of what the structure is that you want, and then kind of task the students to want to go out and create that. And that in itself can be
Yeah.
very exciting because they may take a whole different perspective around delivering the outcome that you want that you hadn't necessarily thought about when you task them with
Right.
the
Right.
assignment. So I would encourage you to always follow the protocol of the academic institution.
Mm.
However, as an instructor or an educator, to be as creative, as innovative as you can, and rely on as much as possible student participation in the experience in order to get the most out of it.
Love this. Love this. Love this. We have to start there. I heard, and oh my God, I'm drawing a blank, that Temple University has a course. Oh my God, what's the gentleman who did the Super Bowl last year? Oh my God, what was his name? They Not Like Us. What was the gentleman? Oh my God. Anyway, they have a course that Temple University was hosting from last year. So I'm really interested to see how that course is going and how the students received it and all kinds of stuff. But we get to touch on
I
that.
mean, if we're doing a shout out, and I will do a shout out to
Do a shout out. Yes.
Dr. Deborah Blair. She's an associate professor at Temple University, and she
Mhm.
leads the DEI Center for the school. And she has a long history in her experience, not
Mhm.
just with the School of Sport, Tourism, and Hospitality Management, but also with the university itself, coming up with some very innovative and some very creative ways of creating environments for students to become much more abreast and much more mindful of diversity. Back in the early 2000s, Deborah and a collaborative partner from the LGBTQ community came up with a theatrical model that allowed for students to be able to see live action scenarios of individuals who were experiencing good customer service and bad customer service specific to the LGBTQ community. But that was amazing to see it launched in an academic
Yeah.
experience because students could see the stop action of the actors, they could make observations, they could engage in questions. It's not rocket science, but I will
Right.
say that the
Right.
way that it was delivered was amazing, and Deborah still continues to do that. So big shout out to Deborah.
Yes, love her and love her. And for the record, that course was Kendrick Lamar. So we need to check with Deborah to find out how that course with Kendrick Lamar. Okay, so let's talk about something to say. Fabulous. Congrats again going into your third season. So, something to say gives space for many, many, many voices. with everything now in the digital and the AI lane, how do you see platforms like podcasts contributing to the broader project to tell a more richer and inclusive America? So we're on this podcast and we're kind of talking about America 250 plus plus plus, but what more can some of our digital partners do or platforms say to kind of help this transition to be a more inclusive America for the next 250 years?
Well, the one thing that I will say about podcasting is that it has made it feasible for anyone to create a platform to tell stories. And that in itself is a huge advancement in terms of how we, whoever you are, can contribute to telling that America's 250 story. What we've certainly found in just the short 2 years, now going on 3 years, that we have had something to say, is the advancement of technology that really helps you to create a more
Mhm.
polished, a much more engaging, informative way of telling stories. And to that degree, the use of technology is something that I completely encourage all podcasters to embrace and to use it as much as they can. I also would say that in developing a podcast, as it was for us with Something to Say, it was about creating something that was very consistent. We wanted to talk about passion. We didn't want to get overly complicated and talk about
Yeah,
specific subject matters, but everyone, whoever you are, have a passion about something. And that passion influences you at work and it influences you
yeah,
at home. And we like to
exactly.
dive into that and kind of hear that story. You know, you and I are having an interview the day after I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Fritz Spencer. And he's an amazing hospitality professional in the UK. He lives in Devon. And I interviewed him, and it was an amazing conversation because even across the pond, the need for passion to influence you and the things that you
Mhm.
do is very relevant. I mean, he's a very astute culinarian, sommelier, and just a very polished hospitality professional. But to be able to tell
Mhm.
his story by using the technology that's available to us today and
Yeah.
have someone in Charlotte, North Carolina probably hear him is an amazing opportunity, and that's why I embrace the idea. We work with two, as you know, incredible partners, a live podcast network, which really builds this platform for Black
Right.
podcasters. And I'm sure
Yep.
as we do the full spinoff of America 250, that you'll be amongst those. And then RSS.com, which really has been one of our biggest distributors for quite some time. And I think just that model of how we focus on passion, work with great partners, tell stories that offer people great insight that can possibly contribute to themselves is amongst the reason why the podcast is so successful. So I encourage everyone to not just listen to it, but also consider maybe stepping into the podcast pool themselves.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Greg, what I really enjoyed about your podcast, even with me on, I love that it's positive. There's so much negativity and so much misinformation out there. And sometimes when I'm on a podcast and I'm listening, I'm like, what are we talking about here? So I love the idea that you have a subject. Not only do you bring on experts from all over the country, but you're talking about something that's neutral and something that's inspiring to the that's inspiring from your guests, but
Mm.
also to the listener. And I think that's exactly what we need. So you can never go wrong with passion with people who are grounded in their principles and in the things that they believe in. So I really applaud you for doing that. So as we start to wrap up, got a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
So give me your life's work. What does an inclusive America look like 250 years from now? So if you was to close your eyes, click your heels. What does it look like 250 years from today?
Wow. Well, 250 years from today, I would envision a more balanced environment that
Mhm.
allows everyone to feel as though that they're able to contribute, and that environment allows for us as a country to move forward to whatever our next level is. Even if it's redefining government, if it's a balanced way of how we do it, and we are able to ensure that everybody benefits from it, I feel as though that would be my vision of what it would look like in the future.
Perfect. Love it. Same here. Same here. So, one last question for you. And thank you again for being on the show and being my introductory guest. But, if listeners could take just one idea away from this conversation, what do you hope that is? What do you think that at some point somebody that's tuning in and saying, I really hope that this sticks with them? What could that be?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I would certainly want anyone who is listening to this podcast is to realize that we live in a country that had a desire to break free in order to evolve. And that evolution was something that was not fully written and it was not fully defined. And we certainly have seen over many, many, many years that we've gotten it wrong. Maybe sometimes we've gotten it right. But I think that it's an experiment that continues to get better. And I think we all have to look at it from that perspective. How can we contribute to make America better? And I think the best way we can do that is to make sure that everyone is involved and that everybody has a fair and equal opportunity to participate.
Love it. Love it. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us and just bringing your insight, your leadership, and all of your lived experiences. Your work reminds us and reminds me that inclusion isn't just about stories, right? It's about telling the truth. And as we reflect more on the topic of today's discussion, before 76, whose America are we still telling? We hope that the discussion encourages our listeners to look deeper, listen differently, and recognize that America's story has always been about broader, richer, and more complex than what we taught. So I think that this is an excellent time to talk about how we're going to work together, how we need each other, how we all need to love on each other more as we build upon the next 250 years in America. So I want to thank you again for joining us. I want to thank you to all of our listeners for being a part of this important conversation. This is America's 250 Plus podcast, where we honor the past by telling the whole story. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts and tune in whenever you can. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thanks for listening to America Unfiltered. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts and join the conversation by following us on social media. I'm Karin Aaron, and until next time, this is America Unfiltered.